All right. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. All right. We're going to get started. I apologize, we're running a little bit late. We're on Arab time today. Thank you all for being here. I'm so happy to see all of your faces here today. My name is Stephanie Nadi Olson. I am a Palestinian American, and as many of you can imagine, the past 11 months have been devastating and heartbreaking as we have witnessed one massacre after another of the Palestinian people, as well as the loss of our collective humanity as we see the continued suffering at the hands of our government and the Israeli government. But as I shared with a wonderful stranger I met 2 days ago at the Atlanta airport, the way that I see people growing the circle of solidarity with Palestinians and continuing to join us and support us and learn more and try to understand more gives me a lot of hope in this moment. So I love seeing you all here, and it's a gift to the movement for a free Palestine. I know many of you are here today to see Miko Peled, me too. I've been eagerly awaiting this day since we got it scheduled, in fact, and we'll hear from him shortly. But before we dive in, I want to thank Dr. Khoury, who brought all of us here today. Dr. Khoury. Dr. Khoury is the founder and president of the Laurice Foundation, which supports students with disabilities in Palestine to receive their secondary and collegiate educations. So he's going to take the stage in a moment just to share more about the foundation and some really exciting news about the foundation, and that I'll save for him. I don't want to steal your thunder, but it's really exciting. And I think the work that the Laurice Foundation is doing is so important because continuing to educate and create avenues for Palestinians to receive education is yet another resistance to the destruction of our culture and identity and our lives. So I'm very thankful to be a board member and to be working with Dr. Khoury on that. Miko and I will be up here doing a fireside chat for you for about an hour. We'll take a restroom break about halfway through, and then at the end, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A with Miko. So please save your questions for the end. We'll make sure that we get to everybody and you can ask your questions. Following the Q&A, Miko will be signing some of his books in the lobby, so stick around for that as well. We've got a packed day, but I feel good about us getting back on time, ish. And if you haven't signed up, I guess everyone here has bought a ticket, so we have all of your emails. We'll be sending out a recording of the event afterwards. Please share it far and wide as well. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Khoury to talk more about the Laurice Foundation.
Can you hear me well? First of all, I want to thank you all for being here this afternoon. It gives me a great honor and pleasure to meet you all and see you here on a Labor Day weekend. My story is a rather long story, but I'll try to make it short. I was born in Nablus, Palestine in 1965. And as a person with a disability, obviously, I opened my eyes and all I could see was the Israeli occupation at the age of 3 until the age of 18. I had to deal with Israeli occupation and disability at the same time. Two big challenges, to be honest with you. And I made a decision to come to America at the age of 18, and I came here. I was able to pursue my education at Syracuse University, and then I moved into become a faculty member at Mercer University. I'm a professor of mathematics. I've been at Mercer University for 31 years. And in 2018, I decided to take a trip, my first trip back to Palestine after I left in 1983. That's 35 years later. And when I went back in 2018, I didn't see that change. The reality is still difficult. The occupation is still here in one way, in one form or another. And I was shocked. 35 years I left and nothing has changed. And I went there for one simple reason, and that is to share my story with disabled students at Najah National University, which is the largest public university in Palestine, in the city of Nablus, my hometown. When I came back, I came with the idea of establishing a foundation And of course, I decided to name the foundation in honor of my mom, Laurice Khoury, who lived with me her last 20 years of her life. She passed away in 2022. And the idea actually for the foundation came before her passing, but I decided to name the foundation in her name, honoring her, because she was really a supporter of my life. And yeah, I wanted to honor her, and that's the best way I could do that. So I'm hoping that this will be time to celebrate her support for people, her children with disabilities. I have a sister also, she was born with a disability. And so I decided to name it after her. And I approached Reverend Fad. I said, Fred, I have this idea, will you help me with it? She said, of course. Fad is a board member, and I would like to also recognize all the board members of the foundation who are present here. I know Stephanie is one, Fad is another one. Where is Christian? Christian, yes. Who else is here from the board members? Elise is here, Elise Cohen is here. Anyone else? Patrick DP, who checked in at the front desk, he's also a board member, he's our treasurer. And let me tell you, the foundation works like a vehicle. There's a driver, there's an engine, and there are wheels. You can't go anywhere without them. So the engine is Patrick, who's the treasurer for the foundation, and the wheels are the board members. And you know, I'm here only to lead the effort and make it happen. And I'm very thankful to your support. Your support, because your support makes things happen. I'm here to tell you today and share with you the good news. We were able to send 16 scholarships to 16 deserving disabled students in Palestine enrolled at Palestinian universities. 5 of the I may be the one who led the effort, but it's you who made the difference. You have to know that. It's you who ultimately makes the difference. Whatever donations you make to the foundation, they're going to go to the support of education of these individuals who are enrolled at Palestinian universities. Let's not forget Gaza, okay? Right now, there are no universities in Gaza that are operating. They're in ruins, to be honest with you. There's nothing left. So we have to wait until Gaza is rebuilt. But the students in Gaza are now enrolled in universities on the West Bank. And Najah National University and Birzeit University are now enrolling about 5,000 students from the Gaza Strip remotely, using very creative methods, using modules, using the internet whenever it's available. So we're still supporting students from Gaza, even though we have no memorandums of understanding with any university in Gaza. God willing, when the war is over, hopefully it will be over yesterday before today, we will be establishing partnerships with universities in Gaza, because the people in Gaza have suffered tremendously. I wouldn't be surprised if we will end up with at least 20,000 amputees in the Gaza Strip after the war is over, at least. And these individuals deserve a future, they deserve a life, they deserve a dream, and their dreams to become true. So I want to encourage you to support the foundation. I'm asking you to support the foundation to help these people, because enough is enough. No, enough is enough. Thank you so much.
All right. So Miko doesn't need much of an introduction. If you follow what's been happening in Palestine for the last 76 years, you've heard of Miko, you've seen him speak. It's an honor to have him here today. His resume as a humanitarian who devotes his time and energy to raising awareness of the injustices perpetrated against the Palestinian people deserves to be commended. Miko's an author, speaker, human rights activist based in DC. He strongly supports the BDS movement and the creation of a single democracy with equal rights for all in historic Palestine. He came into his work by way of personal tragedy. the devastating death of his beloved niece at the hands of a Palestinian suicide bomber. This personal tragedy would spark a desire for an understanding of the apartheid conditions imposed on the Palestinian population and the role played by the Israeli government in the continued suffering of Palestinians. Miko was born and educated in Jerusalem and has been a loyal supporter of the pro-Palestine movement for many years. He's one of the premier scholars on the injustices being committed against the Palestinian people by Israel, and he's written 2 critically acclaimed books. I'm going to urge you many times today to read them because they're incredible. The first is called The General's Son, A Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, and his latest book is called Injustice, The Story of the Holy Foundation 5. Miko will be signing both of these books after our talk today. Miko, I can't thank you enough for being here today. Friends, please join me in welcoming Miko to the stage. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to share
Thank you
this
so
mic.
much. Okay, very good.
I have a lot of questions that I want to ask you, and I think one that's probably on a lot of people's minds is like, how do you go from being the son of this infamous Israeli general to someone who's talking about a free Palestine daily and spending your whole life dedicated to that work these days?
Well, first, let me thank everybody for being here and thank Dr. Khoury for inviting me. We met a few weeks ago at another conference, at the Ramallah Convention, and started chatting, and then he told me about the event and asked me to come. And so I'm honored to be here. This foundation, I can't think of a more honorable or more important cause than to support handicapped Palestinian young people. The lack of infrastructure. By the way, how many people here have been to Palestine? Can I see a show of hands? Oh, wow, okay. How many people are Palestinian? Okay, great. I mean, the lack of infrastructure for handicapped people there is appalling. It's absolutely appalling. I went with a group of friends one of whom just needed a cane and had a little bit of difficulty walking, and it was unbelievable. They're just unbelievable. And you only notice it, of course, when you're with somebody like somebody who has that, has some sort of disability. And so it's a great. This is a great initiative. It's a great foundation. And your story, Hani, is inspiring. So thank you for inviting me and allowing me to be part of this. So how do you go from being raised in a super ultra Zionist patriarch family and end up doing what I do? So there's a book. Unfortunately, the books didn't arrive, so we don't have copies of the books here. But that's why there's a book. And at one point, I was already speaking, and I was. Flip it up a little bit. Oh, this one.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise.
Okay. Oh, I see. Gotcha. Sure. Okay. Sure. No problem. Being raised in the family that I was raised in, so the most famous member of the family was my father because he was a general. And in a militaristic society like the Israeli society, in a militaristic state like the state of Israel, generals are like gods. The military is above everything. Now, what made the distinction that my father had was that he was from a generation that was even more than gods. I don't know how else to describe it, because they were young officers in 1948, and then they were generals in 1967, which in the Zionist narrative were 2 incredibly important developments in the establishment of the Zionist state. So 1948 is considered to be like a war of independence, and 1967 was a war of survival. And the same group of people first as young officers in 1948, then as very young generals. They were in their 40s, which is very, very young. Once again, saved us. So, having one of those people, and it's a very small group of people, one of those people as your father, as you're growing up, your father's a god. I mean, everybody adores him. I mean, you feel very special. But he was not the only member of my family that was part of this legendary group of Zionist leaders. My grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel. I had a great uncle who was the president of the state. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on and on. So family gatherings were like a history book. And I didn't have to learn about Zionism, from a high school book or a college textbook. It was every day. There was no other conversation around the dinner table ever. Nothing else was ever discussed other than the state, what benefits the state, how we give to the state, how we sacrifice, and of course the Zionist state. So that's the background. And what I found in my life, in my experience, is that almost always, if not always, when big shifts happen in our consciousness, in our ability to, the way we view the world, is more often than not as a result of something terrible, something that shakes us to the core and forces us to re-examine everything we know and everything we believe in. And that's exactly what happened to my family. That's what exactly happened. In 1997, it was September 4th, the date is coming up. That date, September 4th, is a date that we all dread in my family, because that was the day it happened. My sister's little girl was killed in a suicide mission in Jerusalem. And that's precisely the kind of shock that forces you to re-examine everything. And typically what happens, because there's so much violence and we've kind of become completely accustomed, like the violence become normalized. The reality in Palestine, the violent reality in Palestine has become normalized, which is one of the big problems, I think, to begin with. So we talk about all these horrific acts of violence, and we just move from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. And of course, the vast majority, the lion's share of the violence is perpetrated against Palestinians. And when speaking to Palestinians, again, it's like a list of horrors that people just go through when they're talking even about their own experience. So I kind of hit pause and said, well, let's see, what actually happened there on September the 4th, 1997? 3 young men took their own lives and the lives of bystanders in downtown, Jerusalem, on the West Jerusalem, the Israeli side of Jerusalem, if you will. Just think about that for a minute. What kind of reality had to be in place for something so terrible to happen? And I think part of the problem is that we never stop to think about that. How do we get to a point where something so horrible can actually happen? And the mid-late 90s were very, very difficult years. There was a lot of violence going on. And again, we just go through the list of the horrors. But it was that moment that really, it didn't happen at that moment. It took a while. And one of the good fortunes that I had, I was living in San Diego already at the time, so I went back to Jerusalem, I spent time with my family, and then went back, and then what do you do? Who do you talk to? Nobody wants to talk about the Palestinian issue anyway. But to talk about particularly something so horrible, there's really nobody. And gradually I was very fortunate that I was able to find the Palestinian community in San Diego, chief of whom was a cousin of Dr. Khoury, who to this day remains my, mentor and a good close friend, George Majid Khoury. And my first encounter with Palestinians was at his home in San Diego. And mind you, I was born and raised in Jerusalem. Well, there are many Palestinians in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is supposedly a mixed city, but it's completely segregated. Completely segregated. So you never meet Palestinians. And from that moment on, my engagement went and developed and became deeper and deeper and deeper. And that was more than 20 years ago.
Was it scary for you? I mean, part of, I feel like the Israeli indoctrination is every Palestinian wants to kill you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Of course. It was, and I talk about this, actually, I describe it in the book, in The General Sun, this feeling that I am, for the first time in my life, going to, now, the meeting I was going to, there was, this is the early 2000s, there was this phenomenon of living room dialogue groups. And that's what this was. My good fortune was that George Khoury and the Palestinians who were in that group were activist people. So I got a really fast and good indoctrination and education about Palestine. But it was, there was definitely some fear involved because, what if it's a trap and what I didn't realize, and I think we often don't realize, are the fears that are embedded in us, and they only show up like when something triggers them for some reason, and that certainly was a trigger. Yeah. So suddenly all these demons started moving from the back of my head into the forefront. But it was one of the most important things I'd ever done.
Yeah, and you did it anyway.
Yeah, I did it anyway, of course, yeah.
I think it's so interesting to think through that because the fear that is instilled in Israelis and Israel, and I think Jews worldwide, about Palestinians and Muslims and Arabs, it's hard to penetrate, and I think you're such an interesting case and somebody who was able to bridge that gap and kind of shed some of that fear and indoctrination in order to have an open heart to receive other people. So what did you learn about Palestinians after that?
Well, what I learned, before I tell you what I learned about Palestinians, what I learned initially throughout that process, because that was the first step in many, many, many instances and experiences that I had, and most of which took place in Palestine itself, where the demons came up and said, "You're out of your mind, don't go there." And I went anyway.
Yeah.
And what I found was if we allow for trust to come in, then the power of the fear is diminished. And the more we do it, the more we allow trust to come in, the more the fear is diminished. And that was the process, and that was that first step. But first of all, the initial moment, the initial experience I had in stepping into that home was the warmth and generosity that is Palestine. There's nothing more powerful than that. And anybody who's been to Palestine and met Palestinians, knows what I'm talking about. There's this warmth and generosity that supersedes, comes before anything and everything, and is more powerful than everything and anything. And that's part of, the character of Palestinians. And that was from that moment and all the way, all these decades, all these years later, that's still my, the strong, if you ask me about Palestinians, those are two things that come to mind.
Yeah. When you began to unpack what would drive these young children, adolescents, to go on a suicide mission, what were the things that you began to unravel about what was actually happening in Palestine and the role that Israel was playing in all of that had been hidden from you your whole life?
So I had a little bit of a head start. So there's another part of the story that has to do with my father, and the reason my father was unique and well known, and that is that in 1967, immediately after the war. Now he was a member of the Israeli High Command, so he was one of the people who planned and executed the 1967. And I think calling it a war actually is a bit of a
misnomer.
I think it's misleading. I think it was a massive, brutal assault by the Zionist state against its neighbors. In 5 days, 3 Arab countries were decimated. You know, the numbers of casualties on the Arab side were, you know, horrifying and so on. And so that's really what that was. But then, on the last day of the war, the 5th day of the war, they called it the 6-day war, but it's actually 5 days. The reason they call it 6 days is to point to the miracle, the 6 days of creation. And in the Jewish texts, in the Jewish scriptures, 6 days, 6 days of creation, 6 days, the miracle of 6 days, shows up a lot in the prayer book. Shows up a lot. And that's why they call it the 6-day war. And I had this conversation with Phil Weiss, who was the guy that founded Mondo Weiss.
Yeah.
And he and I are both, you know, very secular people, and we're both Jewish. And we're both talking about this notion that people who are completely secular and otherwise don't believe in miracles on this issue agree that that was a miracle. But anyway, so that's just a little side note about the 6 days. But he stood up on the first meeting of the Israeli High Command while still in uniform and said, now we have an opportunity to resolve the Palestinian question. We can allow them to establish a state of their own in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, make peace with the state, return all these other territories that we just occupied, and move on. And for somebody with his background to say something like that was unbelievable. And of course,
Because it was viewed as generous to the Palestinians?
it was insane.
Yeah.
You know, the war, the attack and the occupation that came as a result were not something that they just had an idea, oh, let's do this tomorrow morning. This is something that was well planned. This is part of the Zionist ideology. You know, a lot of these generals were upset that in 1948, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were not taken. They had to wait 20 years. They finally were given the opportunity to do what they call finish the job, which is the conquest of Palestine, or what they call the land of Israel. And suddenly this guy who was a major player in pushing for the war, suddenly says we have to give it all back. What is he out of his mind? So he was told basically, just, you know, this is nonsense. Why is he talking like this? He remained in the military another year, and then the rest of his life, he died in 1995, he pursued that idea of what we know today is a two-state solution. And he became Mr. Peace with Palestine. That was kind of the second part of his life. That was his legacy. Granted, he was a Zionist and all that, but that was something that he believed in very strongly. He met with Yasser Arafat, and, you know, there's a whole part of his life that has to do with that. So I came into this with a head start because I already knew that there were some, in this whole Zionist story, there were some imperfections. So what happened on September the 4th, 1997, opened up those imperfections even more. And I have to give credit where credit is due. My sister, whose daughter was killed, she stood up and she was asked, you know, people came, it was a big news, a lot of newspaper interviews and stuff like that. I mean, their apartment was packed with journalists from around the world. And she stood up and she said, number one, no role mother would want to see this happen to any other mother. Don't talk to me about retaliation. Number two, she said, what do we expect? When you do this to another people, when you oppress them and kill their children and arrest their fathers and take their land and on and on and on, what do we expect? How can we not, you know, this is what's going to happen. And that, of course, shook me and shook everybody else that heard it. You know, a mother who just lost her daughter talking like that. And then I came back to the US with this very strong sense that I need to get into this. You know, doesn't matter what I do, I have to get into this. And so I would go back and forth. I'd come here, and then I'd go back to Palestine, and I would travel more and learn more and go to Palestinian cities, you know, different parts of Palestine. And you know, the more I got into it, the more I got into it.
Yeah. I think I've been learning as much as I can about kind of the storytelling that is such a big part of the Zionist narrative, right? Like the storytelling of you can't go into Palestine, right? They want you dead, like don't step foot in there, right? And so I think kind of unpacking that and being able to navigate the country and step foot in the country and get to know people is so important. When you think about the bridge from 1948 to 2024 with 11 months of continued massacre, do you see it as one long kind of genocide against Palestinian people in service of getting greater Israel, you know, all the land that Israel wants? Or how do you think about that continuation of violence and everything that's been perpetrated against Palestinians?
I think that, excuse me, I think anybody who pays attention can see that this is one long continuation. There's this narrative out there that says, you know, there's been an extreme, that the Israeli society has become more extreme, that it's gone farther to the right. How much more extreme can they get from 1948? I mean, 1948 was a massive campaign of genocide and ethnic cleansing, and an apartheid regime was put in place. There's more extreme than that, you know? And then all of those years, the massacres didn't stop. The apartheid only became, you know, more entrenched. There hasn't been any, you know, it is one continuum, and what is happening now, the last 10, 11 months in Gaza, is an absolutely natural progression of what we've seen over the last 76 years. In other words, let me put it this way. Anybody who's surprised hasn't been paying attention. And for years now, and I noticed this only recently, you know, people replay videos of mine from the past, and I've been saying, we haven't even begun to see the worst of it. We haven't even begun. We're going to look back at the years, this is pre-October 7, as the good old days. And that's if we don't stop it, if we don't do everything we can to dismantle the apartheid state and disable it so that the lives of Palestinians, the safety of Palestinians are guaranteed, then it's going to get far, far worse. And of course it did. So it is absolutely one continuous process of genocide without any question. And it is without any doubt an apartheid regime that is just becoming more and more entrenched. And what is absurd is, first of all, that there's international legitimacy given to this apartheid state from the outset, from the very beginning. Now, 3 years before the apartheid state was established in Palestine, the world put on trial the perpetrators of the Jewish Holocaust, of the Nazi Holocaust. They, you know, terms like law, you know, the legal definitions like crimes against humanity, genocide, were established in those years, within those years, between 45 and 49, 48. And then they let this happen. They let this genocide unfold. They let this apartheid regime take hold of Palestine right in front of everybody's eyes. And to make it even worse, how cynical of them, they pretended that that is okay to do because of what happened to Jewish people during World War II. In other words, how embarrassing, I mean, I can't imagine the cynicism to justify the horrors that were taking place in Palestine since 1948, to justify that. It's almost a desecration of the memory of the Jews who were killed in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
To say that this justifies that. But they've been very good at it. And today, people are arguing about whether or not it's a genocide. Well, genocide is a very well-defined crime. It was defined. It's written in law. You can read it. And if you take the definition of the crime of genocide and what has been happening in Palestine since 1947, you can check every single box.
It's, you know, I was stopped by a Zionist recently who told me that we can't call it a genocide for, to counter what you just said, you can't call what's happening to Palestinians a genocide because you discount what happened to Jews. And I'm like, because we know what happened in the Holocaust, we know what we are seeing today, and we know that it's a genocide. And it's hard, right? I think for Palestinians and for people who care about Palestine and educating folks, it can feel like you're getting gaslighted incessantly, right? Like everything that Israel says is actually, accuses Palestine of, is actually an admission of their own guilt. And it's hard to start to find a place to unpack that as people who care about what happens in Palestine and care about the lives being lost. I mean, where do you even start? How do you think about, there's so many levels on which you can make an impact. Being in this room is one of them, but how do you fight this propaganda machine that's got an 8-decade head start on many people?
Yeah, well, that's probably the most difficult question. But I think that a good place to start is to be unapologetically honest. People always say, well, I can't really talk about this because I have a son-in-law or a neighbor or a friend or somebody who's Jewish. So because they're Jewish, they get a pass? I don't get it.
Yeah.
If they were, if they're anti-Semitic, if they were white supremacist, if they're any other sort of racist, if they were expressing other types of racism, would they get a pass too? I mean, I don't get it. This whole notion that people get a pass for being racist because they're Jewish is absolutely ludicrous. This entire initiative of the Zionist state in Palestine is a racist, genocidal, structure. They get a pass because of the Holocaust? How does that even begin to make sense? But that's how people see it. And serious, intelligent people say this to me every day. There's almost not a day goes by where somebody doesn't say that. Well, we don't want to rock the boat, or sometimes we're at church. Sometimes people say, well, we're in an interfaith group, but we can't talk about this because the Jews will leave. I'm going, if they're racist, let them go. Let them leave. Bring other Jews. I don't get it. There are plenty of Jews who are not Zionists. There are plenty of Jews who are anti-Zionist. Why do you have to sit with the Zionists? Why do you have to sit with the racist ones? Because they occupy the space of, being in these big synagogues. They don't get a pass. Nobody gets a pass for racism. Nobody gets a pass for supporting violence, period. We say no tolerance, we should mean no tolerance. So I think that's where you start, by being, uncompromisingly honest about this and unapologetically honest about this.
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit just for historical context, right? Because I think hopefully there's not a person in this room who doesn't agree that what happened in the Holocaust is beyond comprehension and horrific. And so you have this population of people who are terrified and have suffered such deep loss, right, at the end of World War II. Some of them come into Palestine. Like, can you talk a little bit about how that went down and, what happened leading up to the establishment of the State of Israel on stolen Palestinian land?
So there's a misconception about what happened in that period. And people always say, how could people that have suffered this do this? Okay? It's not the same people. The vast majority of Holocaust survivors did not go to Palestine. Less than 10%, very, very small percentage of people who survived the genocide of the Jews in World War II went to Palestine, and many of them left. They couldn't stand it. There's a movie that I just co-produced with a friend of mine. We interviewed a wonderful activist, Holocaust survivor, by the name of Jacques Boud, who lives in Brussels. It's a 12-minute documentary. It's actually been accepted to a couple of movie festivals. And I'll just tell you his story briefly because it speaks to that. So his parents were taken to Auschwitz and killed. He was saved by Belgians. And then after the war, the survivor Jewish children were put in orphans. And the orphans were all sent, as soon as the state of the Zionist state was established, they were sent there. And he was I don't know, 17, something like that. And he didn't want to go. He said, I want to go home. I want to stay with the people who saved me. And he couldn't because he was under 18. He had to go. So he arrived and he stayed just a couple of years. And he hated every second of it. And he describes it much better than I possibly could. But basically, he says, number one, he was this. He describes the cities, Jaffa, Ascalon, all these places that were emptied, as ghost towns. And we rarely hear from people about that. Those early years before these cities were settled again by immigrants, by Jewish Zionist immigrants. The city were got ghost towns. And then he wanted to leave, but he couldn't leave because he didn't have papers, and he couldn't get papers unless he served in the military, and he would not serve in the military for anything in the world. He says this militant state was mad. So he got a job as a guard in an orchard near Ascalon. And the southern coast of Palestine was famous for citrus orchards. The fragrance of citrus in that part of the country is always intoxicating. And he said, I was 17, they gave me a gun with live ammunition with the expectation that if an Arab, because Israel, the name Palestinian was not acceptable, right? If an Arab comes to get an orange, he should shoot and kill him for taking an orange that initially probably belonged to them anyway, because Palestinians would come in from time to time and to get food, to get whatever, and the order was they should be shot on sight. Any Palestinian that comes back should be killed on sight. So he goes, they give me a 17-year-old a gun with ammunition telling me it's okay for me to kill a person because they wanted to take an orange, which again was theirs to begin with. And he just he describes this reality, and what he did was he managed to get some money, get papers. He paid somebody to forge papers, and he got the hell out. And he's been a pro-Palestine activist, anti-Zionist activist his entire life. So this idea that somehow these are the same Jews is not true. Like again, very few Holocaust survivors actually went to Palestine, and many of them that came left, not only because they were disgusted by the militaristic state, but also because of the way they were treated, because the Zionists looked down at them. One of the first things Jacques told me when I met him was how the Zionists would look at him like the ones who were already there, at the Holocaust survivors for being like dust, for like being worthless. Because they were led like sheep to the slaughter, sort of thing. They didn't fight, they weren't Zionists, and they didn't, And I remember learning this too, growing up. Had they been Zionists, had they come to Palestine, this wouldn't have happened to them, so in a way they had it coming. This is how deeply racist and insane Zionist ideology is. Just think about that. So and he also says, he says, I can't believe, he says, it's offensive to me to think that they justify this racism, violence against Palestinians because he says, by the death of my parents, which is of course, unthinkable. So that's I think that's the answer to that question, that equation.
And so when you were raised, were you told there weren't really a lot of Palestinians here? What was the story? What was the narrative to justify coming onto this land and just taking up residence?
Well, that's an interesting story because in my case, there's a little twist. So yes, it's not a question whether they were here or not. It's a question that, it's ours. We were here 2,000 years ago and now we're back. And the casualness of the way this is told to a child is, when you think about it now, yeah, we were here 2,000 years ago and now we're back. Yeah, of course. It makes perfect sense, right? So, and I look at the color of my skin, and there's not a Semitic, gene in my entire DNA, right?
I wasn't going to say it.
So you don't need to say it, it's obvious. So somehow the assumption that Jews around the world, all around the world, are the descendants of an ancient tribe that used to live in Palestine 3,000 years ago. And now, because of that, they have a right to come back, displace Palestinians, and take over their country violently. The fact that this is even something that people talk about, again, seriously, is absolutely crazy. I mean, it's discussed in such a casual manner as though it makes perfect sense. But yeah, but of course, this is our country and we're back. But that's the narrative. Yeah. That's the story. And then we were told that, the Arabs were told by their leaders to leave. That whole myth about that.
Well, they chose to leave, right?
And so now the twist in my story is this, and this is something that I realized that came back to me as I was writing the book, which is now more than 10 years ago. So I remember my entire life a story that my mother told me. My mother was born and raised in Jerusalem. And in 1948, she was 22. She was already a mother. And when the Zionist forces came in and forced the Palestinians out of West Jerusalem, so some of you may know this, but in West Jerusalem, there are these incredibly beautiful Palestinian neighborhoods. And most of them are still there. Imagine beautiful homes. These homes were offered to people like my mother, and she was offered one of these beautiful homes. Now, she was living in a tiny apartment with her parents and young children. And she refused. She said, how could I possibly move into the home of another family, of another mother, who are now refugees? And she talked about it my entire life. She told the story so many times with so much pain. And then how the homes were looted. They had trucks, and they came with trucks, and they stole everything. So that doesn't make sense, because that's not the narrative. That's not the story that I know. The story that I know is they attacked us and then they left because we won or something, some kind of distorted version of that. But we being the ones kicking people out and stealing, how does that fit into this perfect little narrative? It didn't. No. But eventually, I think it was a crack in that wall that helped me when I started coming, when I would hear, like, for example, George Khoury talk about his version growing up in Jerusalem and what happened to his family. And others, suddenly there was a space there for me to understand that, oh, wait a minute, that relates to what my mother told me. So I heard it, if you will, from both ends, from both sides. But that was the story that I was told, and that's the story that we all believe, of course.
I think for people who are born and raised outside of Palestine or Israel, and like me, raised in the US, when I try to understand what does it really mean to live in an apartheid Palestine? And the analogy that comes up for me growing up in the South here is the Jim Crow South, right? It was just widely, and it still exists, frankly, but it's just widely accepted that this is the way things are. Were there things that you saw or heard of that you were just kind of like, oh yeah, that's just how it is? And then I guess the follow-up to that is, can you share some examples of what it means for Palestinians to live in an apartheid state? Like tangible, what is it like for them day to day?
So, I grew up in Jerusalem, and it's a completely segregated racist city. So I could tell, now, two things. Number one, we don't go into their neighborhoods because it's dangerous. But from time to time, we might drive through or we see them, you could see that there's a difference. Their schools don't look like ours. Their streets don't look like ours. They don't have sidewalks and playgrounds and, and running water. And there's it's a completely, you can tell this, one side looks modern and like this, and the other side kind of looks dusty and backward. Yeah. And the backstory is, well, of course they're backward because they're Arabs. We came as Europeans, and we're more advanced, and we're smarter, and we are hardworking, and so look what we did. And then, look at them. And this is happening even today when you drive up and down the country through Palestine, you see on the Israeli settlements look like modern cities. The Palestinian towns look like they're backward. And the assumption, even today, is always, well, what do you expect? I mean, obviously, these are Europeans, and so they're advanced, and these are Arabs, and so they're backward. The fact that, for example, and this goes to the second part of your question, Palestinians, well, let me backtrack. So let's talk about water for a second, because I think that's a big part of the apartheid and how it impacts Palestinians. So the state of Israel has its own agency that deals with all the water, controls all the water. It's called Mekorot. So they control all the water. They allocate 3% of the water, 3% of the water to the Palestinian population. Now, throughout Palestine, and again, just to be clear, when I say Palestine, I don't mean little bits and pieces of Palestine. I mean, Palestine, all of it. Throughout Palestine, today there's about 7.5 million Palestinians, about 6 or 6.5 million Israelis, okay? Palestinians receive about 3% of the water. Now, it's a small country, relatively speaking, and the Palestinian neighborhoods and cities are sometimes just across the street from each other. Across the street. Like you'll have an Israeli settlement here, and you'll have a Palestinian town here across the street. How the level of sophistication you have to have in the water distribution so that one side gets all the water they need as much as they want, whenever they want it. I mean, I never had to think twice about opening the faucet or watering the lawn or drinking or anything, ever. On the other side, they're lucky if they get 7, 8, 10 hours of running water a week. A week. So that part of the story is not known. Now, think about that, the difference that the town, what the towns look like, what it changes everything, right? If you have that little water on this one side and you have all the abundance of water that you possibly want. So you see this, as a kid, you don't know the word apartheid. I didn't know the word apartheid, but I could see that there was a difference. And I remember asking, why do they look like this? And why are there towns like this? And why is there such a big difference? And the answer was always like a shrug. Well, that's how it is, because it's just Arabs. They're kind of, Until later on, that kind of shifted. Even in my family, that conversation shifted a little bit. But that's what you see, and that's what you comprehend. And what you don't know, again, is the water issue.
Yeah.
And until you visit Palestinian homes, and it doesn't matter where. It doesn't matter where. Anywhere throughout Palestine, you see the water issue. It's one of the most glaring differences that you notice.
Yeah. I'm going to give you an open-ended question. I want to hear your thoughts on October 7th and what's unfolded since then.
Sure.
And how we got there, which we've talked a little bit about.
Well, how we got to October 7th is, almost 8 decades of oppression. I mean, that's how we got there, of apartheid and genocide. That's how we got there. I don't think there was anything surprising in the fact that, what happened on October 7th happened on October 7th. And maybe we should talk about the Gaza Strip for a little bit. People discuss the Gaza Strip and the West Bank as though these are like countries or something, as though these are like real areas that have a history. The West Bank and the Gaza Strip were drawn by the Zionist state as prisons, especially the Gaza Strip, as a prison. It's a prison that's been in place for more than 7 decades, the Gaza Strip, and it was created as a place to herd in hundreds of thousands of refugees from mostly southern Palestine. That's why there's a strong connection between the Palestinians in southern Palestine and Naqab and the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, because they all come from the same place. That's what the Gaza Strip is. It's a prison. And I'll jump forward a little bit to the end of the story. People talk about, well, who's going to control the Gaza Strip next? The Gaza Strip needs to be dismantled. It's a prison. It's a prison. It needs to be completely disappeared. Over 2 million people live in the Gaza Strip should have the right to go. If you drive from any place in this thing called the Gaza Strip east for 5-10 minutes, there's all the water, all the food, all the electricity, everything you need. Hospitals, medical care. There's no reason on the face of the earth, not a single justification for the people in the Gaza Strip to lack anything. to lack anything other than they are in a prison and they're prevented from getting these things. And this crazy notion that aid needs to be sent through Egypt, and God knows how many trucks are waiting for approval of who? The Zionist state, to allow the aid to come in. Open the damn gates, dismantle this stupid thing, and let people go and buy what they need to buy and get what they need to get. But everybody's accustomed to, oh, Gaza, West Bank, Gaza. People won't even say Palestine anymore. They say West Bank. I'm going to stop saying West Bank. First of all, the West Bank really doesn't exist. These are just literally concentration camps where 3.5 million people live in these areas surrounded by cities and towns for Jews only. That's really what the West Bank became. There is no such thing as the West Bank anymore. So, and that's just these two areas. Now there's the lion's share of Palestine, 1948 Palestine, where Palestinians live again under horrific conditions, even though they carry this citizenship. They're citizens of the Zionist state. So what led up to this? Well, that's what led up to it. Almost 8 decades of horror. Now, the way it's interesting. I know we talked about Mondoweiss. So I write from time to time, and I sent them an article on October the 6th. And I woke up October 7th, and I had an email from the editor saying, "Could you update your article based on what happened?" And I thought, what happened? So of course I look up and I see what happened. So then and that was the last thing I wrote. I couldn't write until a few weeks ago. I couldn't write. I just couldn't write. It was, and that was the last thing I wrote for a very long time. But immediately my response was this heroic operation by fighters who come out of one of the most oppressed and impoverished areas in the world. And as we all know, they came by gliders, they came by foot, and they came through, with boats. And they completely paralyzed the Zionist state. Completely paralyzed. They came from a place where a cup of water like this is a luxury. Well, this is a luxury. A cup of clean water is a luxury. 3 meals a day are a luxury. Antibiotic, if you have a child that has an ear infection, is a luxury. And they came out from there, and they were able to completely shut down. And in many ways, the Zionist state is still shut down. The southern port of Eilat is shut down. The economy is in chaos, the political structure is in chaos. And on and on and on. They really managed to do what many have tried and failed to do, which is to shut it down. It was brilliantly executed. I think it was obvious to anybody who knows anything that the Palestinians are going to pay a heavy price, beyond a heavy price, because this monster of a war machine, which is the Zionist state, was humiliated beyond words. They were humiliated before, by the way. Every single time they were surprised they were humiliated. And by the way, this happened exactly 50 years and 1 day after the beginning of the October 1973 war, where 2 Arab armies surprised the state of Israel, the Syrians and the Egyptians. And they were not able to do what the Palestinians in Gaza did. But they humiliated, the entire apparatus, defense apparatus, was in panic in 1973. I still remember it as a kid. And so they, and then the interesting thing is, immediately, of course, the Zionist state came out with all these horrific lies, all these horrific stories about rape and murder and God knows what else. And I couldn't write, but I was posting a lot of stuff. And my response to that was, first of all, we need to find out what happened. We need to see some kind of an independent investigation because none of these claims make sense. Number one, these were disciplined Palestinian fighters. It doesn't make sense that any of that other stuff would have happened. Number two, the declared objective of the operation was to capture prisoners and conduct a prisoner exchange, to release Palestinian prisoners. Why would they do all this other stuff? None of it made any sense, you know? And again, disciplined fighters don't do these things. So none of it made sense, and of course, it turned out that these were all lies, which is, of course, no surprise.
But our government still
But
repeats.
the government, but it's still, these lies are still being repeated, of course, because they have to maintain this narrative. So then you had this monster, this humiliated monster, unleash its vengeance. And when you're a bully, where do you unleash your vengeance? On the most defenseless victim you can find. And these are the people who live in the Gaza Strip. And that's what we've seen, this sadistic brutality that we've seen over the last 11 months. That's what this is. It's this humiliated monster unleashing its vengeance. That's really all it is. So that's been my response, and that's been my, and I'll say one more thing as a result of this. Another thing that came out as a result of this is what we've seen on campuses, this rebellion on campuses. Now, I've been saying this, for a very long time. The most important work for Palestine in this country is being done by student groups on campuses. Nobody's raised the level of conversation of Palestine like students on campuses have. No one. Absolutely. And anything anybody who's no longer in college can do to support them, go and do it. Whatever the local college is closest to you, find the MSA, find the SJP, now there's Palestine Youth Movement, go and support them. Because they need all the help they can get. The administration wants to get rid of them, and you saw how they're all being punished for standing up for what is right. And first of all, their actions were nothing short of heroic.
Yeah.
And I've been, honored to visit some of these encampments, some of these liberated zones, and it was just inspiring. On the one hand, you see this just lack of humanity, the worst lack of humanity, the worst, expression of inhumanity we can possibly imagine. And on these campuses, the most beautiful expression of humanity you can imagine. It was incredible. And what's beautiful about that is their demands, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, were completely unapologetically honest. They demanded to divest, which is exactly what you're supposed to do when the crime of apartheid is taking place and the crime of genocide is taking place, is to divest, and they demanded. And they demanded a free Palestine from the river to the sea. And when they were reprimanded and told, well, you shouldn't say river to the sea, you shouldn't say Palestine, it might offend anyone, they took the mic and they said it even louder. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. In other words, this level of unapologetic expression of a demand for justice it's inspiring. And in a way, there are parallels, I think, between that and what we see the fighters from Gaza did. They went against all odds. They're going against the known narrative. And unapologetically, they're demanding what they deserve.
That's right. I think this is a good time to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll do Q&A. All right, we're going to dive back in. For the Q&A, if you can just raise your hand and I'll point to somebody. I'll repeat your question for the folks who are joining via live stream, and then Miko will answer and we'll go from there. Please keep it to one question at a time, and we'll do as many questions as we can get to. How many people here know Fahad? Fahad runs the city. Actually, before we do Q&A, I'm going to take a departure. We have 2 Nakba survivors in the room with us today, the 1948 Nakba, the beginning of this nightmare for Palestinians. Reverend Fahed, the busiest 80-year-old you'll ever meet in your life, and my dad, Ramadan Nadi here, who is the secretary. Honored to have you guys here today.
Your dad is older than I. 5 seconds.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll start with questions. Dad, I know you have a question. You can stand up.
Thank you. I appreciate your comment. Thank you for all your comment. I have a question really bothering me. I born in 44 and 84 in Palestine, 48, I'm sorry, Palestine, 44. I left Palestine when I was 4 years old. We went with the refugees camp to Jordan. We stayed at camp for 10, 15 years or more. And we came to, so what I want to know what the difference between what the Holocaust and the difference what does Israel do in that. And one follow-up, I went to Jerusalem after 70 years. Since I left Palestine, we never went back. I went there like a year and a half ago with my son-in-law and my daughter and my wife. And I have American passport for 50 years. And when I went to Tel Aviv, for some reason they scanned my passport and they said, sit down. They took my passport, I sat down for 4 hours. And you don't know what the heck is going to go with you. They're going to throw you in jail. Why? And you have American passport, and nothing doesn't really matter if you have American passport or Chinese passport, long you Palestinian. And the reason I said that because my name Ramadan, and where I'm born, the passport is Palestine. So I have to stay for 4 hours to call to the room and why come here, what you been doing, to change your name, all those humiliating questions. So if they don't give a damn about your American passport, how you tell me why this can support Israel by giving weapons to killing those Palestinians? How this became overrun? The Jews control this country? I just want to tell you, this is my fear. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna try to repeat that. We'll take the first part of that, right? You know, when you look at historically what happened in the Holocaust, how does it, you know, I don't want to get into the suffering Olympics because everybody has been through something horrific. But how do you think about what the Jews went through in the Holocaust in Europe compared to what Palestinians have gone through? Like, what are the parallels that you see, and are there any stark differences that led to both of these atrocities?
Well, racism and humanity are nothing new, and they're not exclusive. Racism and humanity exist everywhere. The Holocaust, the name Holocaust is a little troublesome. You know, because Holocaust means kind of sacrifice by fire, and you know, something kind of heavenly and godly and everything. It's a little bit, you know. But the genocide of the Jews in Europe was brought to an end. The regime the Nazi regime, the Nazi occupation of Europe, the Nazi occupation even of Germany, you know, was brought to an end. The genocide of the Palestinian people has been going on for almost 8 decades. And we can talk about that all day and how that has happened and why it's being allowed and so forth. But like I said before, the cynical use of the genocide of the Jews to justify what the Zionists are doing to Palestinians is cynical beyond words. And the fact that the world is somehow accepting this, that somehow the Zionists get a pass because they happen to be Jewish, So does that mean that you should open the prisons and anybody who's Jewish should be let out? I mean, I don't understand the logic. And I would also add here that Jews have opposed Zionism from the moment that Zionism began. And as early as the year 1900, and this is, I'm going on a tangent here, but I think it gives some context and understanding the difference between Judaism, which is a faith, which is a religion, and Zionism, which is a racist political ideology. In the year 1900, all the most important rabbis in Europe put out a booklet, a warning for Jewish people from the dangers of Zionism. Now, in the year 1900, Zionism had only been around for a very short time, but these rabbis already saw. And in that booklet, which I have, it's interesting, they published it in Hebrew, which was not a language that they used.
Right.
They basically said three things. They said Zionism will bring violence to the Holy Land. It will ruin the good relations that exist between Jews and Arabs and Jews and Muslims. Because there are large Jewish communities in Arab countries and all over the Muslim world. And they lived well, they had good relations. And they said it would cast doubt as to the loyalty of Jews in the countries that they exist. Because Jewish people are a religious minority throughout the entire world. They always have been. Suddenly, and this is happening. It happened, and it continues to happen, and it happened particularly in the Arab world, where suddenly Jews were faced with this question: well, are they supporting the Zionist thing, or are they Iraqi Jews? Are they supporting the Zionist thing, or are they citizens of the country where they exist? And this was written in 1900. They foresaw what was going to happen, and that's exactly what happened. All these years later, we know that they were right. So, I mean, comparing these two tragedies, I don't know that we can compare them, other than to say the common denominator is racism and inhumanity, and the lesson to be learned, if there's a lesson to be learned, is that we need to make sure that we educate and we teach humanity, and we have no tolerance for violence and racism, or there should be no tolerance. And when we say no tolerance, we should practice that. So on college campuses, they have all these pro-Zionist groups, and if a college campus declares that there should be zero tolerance on that campus for racism, and I ask this question when I speak on campuses: why are they tolerating these Zionist groups, these pro-Zionist groups on campus? Why are they allowed to be there? And over the last year, we've seen what they're capable of doing, just how violent they are in the way that they responded to the movement, the pro-Palestine, the pro-justice movement on campuses. We saw the violence that came from the Zionists. So, it's up to us to make sure that this doesn't happen again. It's up to us to end what is happening in Palestine now. I get asked sometimes, do you think this will happen in our generation or the next generation? I mean, what? This needs to end now. This needs to end now. The Sixth Fleet, the U.S. Navy's Sixth Fleet, is in the Mediterranean. We pay for it. It works for us. They need to impose a no-fly zone, an arms embargo, and provide humanitarian aid immediately. Sending more bombs and weapons and money to the perpetrators of this of a genocide? What kind of a world are we living in? What kind of strange country is this that we're paying taxes? Not only are they sending our money there, but they're also, but again, like I said, the U.S. Sixth Fleet is there. They can stop it. And we need to also understand and appreciate that all of this could have been prevented. And that nobody else is going to end it but us. There's not going to be a Messiah, Salahuddin, a president, a leader that's going to show up and end it. No. This is it. We're it. We either act and we demand to end it now, and we can talk about how we end it, or it's never going to end. Those are the choices.
That brings me to the second part of that question. I mean, why is our government acting against the interests of the majority of Americans now who want an arms embargo? But we continue to write checks and send bombs. Why is the U.S. so wedded to this genocide?
Well, the U.S. is wedded to Zionism. And the Zionists for over 100 years have been putting everything, investing everything they have, the best people, and everything they possibly can to make sure that that their agenda, that their objectives are met in this country. They started long before they ever established a state. And they understood very early on that in this country, all politics is local. So they've invested in local politics. They still do. Anybody running for school board, city council, sheriff, mayor, in the smallest cities in the middle of nowhere, are immediately invited to a tour. They're immediately contacted. They're immediately sent material. They're on it, and they've been on it for 100 years because for them, they can't allow any doubt as to whether or not what they're saying is true, as to whether or not what they're doing is right. The entire education system in this country is a Zionist education system. Americans are Zionists whether they know it or not. If you walk down the street and ask somebody about Palestine, more than 50% chance that they'll confuse it with Pakistan. Right? If you say to the same person Israel, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. They'll know the Holocaust, they'll know the biblical stories, they'll know Israel, they'll know terror, Americans receive, because the Zionist movement created organizations throughout this country to make sure that the curriculum is a Zionist curriculum.
Also, the Arab rulers let it happen.
Well, that's another question. That's another question that we can discuss if you want, but that's a whole other issue. But the Zionist movement, from the very beginning, did a very good job in making sure that their interests are met. And that's where we are today. And so when you come up to Americans who receive a Zionist education and suddenly say it's an apartheid state and we need to demand a boycott, their response is, you must be anti-Semitic. And it makes sense in that context that they'll call us anti-Semitic. Because how else, what do you mean apartheid? It's the only democracy in the Middle East. It's the only Jewish state, and there are all these Arab countries and Muslim countries. So why are you picking on them? And there's human rights violations in Saudi Arabia. Why are you picking on this? I mean, in that context, all of this makes sense. But they don't know what they don't know. And nobody's going to teach them but us, and that's why maybe I'll say a word or two about this new initiative that we have in Washington, D.C. We just established an organization and a location in Washington, D.C. called Palestine House of Freedom, Dar Hurriya. And we have a large office space on Capitol Hill, 2 blocks away from the Capitol. We put the Palestinian flag and the name Palestine on Pennsylvania Avenue. You can see it from the Capitol. And the most important aspect of our work is to shift the conversation. Because until we shift the conversation, we're going to be stuck in this
Disputing Zionist talking points.
Exactly, disputing Zionist talking point. We need to start charting our own path to the liberation of Palestine, to the dismantling of apartheid. And we're not going to do it if all day long we're on the defensive. Exactly. So that's really what this is about. But in the context of the United States, this is the reality, and you can't blame them for doing what is in their best interest. I mean, we can blame them because they're violent, racist, and there should be zero tolerance for them. But they did it in a country that is inherently racist anyway. They talk about shared values between these two countries. Well, there are shared values: genocide, racism, segregation. I mean, there are a lot of shared values between these two countries. Europeans that came and felt that they were better than other people because they were white and they were not white. I mean, that's how this whole thing began. White, racist Europeans deciding that it's okay to take the country of people who are not white.
Thank you. I'm the youngest child, and I'm obsessed with fairness. So we're going to take a question from this group next, and then this group. Yes.
Thank you for your time. Sure. As an American, I've always been struck by how spectacularly the troubles in Palestine affect American politics. And so a couple of dimensions of that I'd like to ask your opinion on. So one aspect is America has a colonial history of its own, history of intergenerational trauma among indigenous peoples. And certainly you see something in playing like that here in Israel. But you could also argue that Jews also have a history of intergenerational trauma, looking beyond. It's not necessarily individual to individual, but generations. So there's definitely that idea that the trauma, the person who's traumatized can disconnect and project and become the abuser in some ways. So the first question I had for you is, to what extent can the politics of memory, the Holocaust itself, become a resource for building bridges in Israel toward one Palestine? That would be my first question. And in the second question, again, the fear of, in American politics, the fear of the other kind of taking over our culture, our white culture, and destroying our culture, destroying who we are. I think that plays out in Israel. The fear, it's always been a fear that, well, if they become the Arab majority, what will happen to Jewish culture, Jewish citizens? How do you, if you're going to build one Palestine, how do you speak to those fears?
Thank you. So the first question is there a way to honor and memorialize the memory of the genocide of Jews and the Holocaust to build peace in Palestine? Is that fair? Yes. Okay, we'll start there.
Well, right now, the Holocaust is used for the exact opposite purposes. It's being manipulated in order to do the opposite. And so Israeli kids who have nothing to do with the Holocaust, whose families had nothing to do with it, are educated and taken on tours to concentration camps and so on, being told that everybody around you is a potential Nazi, and the Arabs today are the new Nazis, and the Palestinians, all that. So it's not, we're nowhere near knowing how to use that, but sure, of course, any tragedy of such proportions can and should be used to teach humanity and tolerance. But we're far, far from that, and so far as I can tell, all the Holocaust museums and the tolerance museums are directed to teach intolerance and racism towards Palestinians. So that's very, very sad, but I agree with you. I think there's enormous potential in humanity, particularly if we look at people like this gentleman I mentioned, the documentary we made about, by the way, it's called The Orphan. Jacques, who, that's exactly what he says. He says, if there's any lesson to be learned from this, is that we just need to teach people to be humans, to be people, as opposed to what is being taught right now. What was the second part?
The second question was about this idea that if Jews aren't allowed to continue to run Israel, do they lose part of their culture?
Well, Israel has nothing to do with Jewish culture. It's an implant. It's like white South Africans. They're implants. They don't belong. They're the results of a racist movement of settler colonialism. They don't, but now they're there. They're part of the reality right now. But Israeli culture, such as it is, has nothing to do, or very little to do with Jewish culture. The language is, Jewish people, by definition, have no common language, no common culture, and no common country. They're united by their faith. That's it. That's why you could have Jews in Yemen, Jews in Poland, Jews in anywhere else who don't speak the same language, who don't eat the same food, who don't look alike, practice the same faith. The Zionists came to Palestine and created this new thing and claimed that was Jewishness. It had no faith in it. It's completely secular. It was racist and violent and violated every single Jewish law known to man. Remember this thing of something about 10 Commandments, about no stealing and no murdering and no killing? Well, Zionists threw that away right off the bat. Jewish sovereignty in the Holy Land is prohibited by Jewish scripture. Jews are prohibited from sovereignty in the Holy Land. You know? Jews are prohibited from carrying arms. Jews are pacifists. The Zionists are these militant, and even in their own statements, the early Zionists were saying that a Zionist should be the exact opposite of a Jew. Should look nothing or act like nothing, should look or act nothing like the Jew. So, I mean, to claim that, now you're right in that, and I remember this as a child, oh my goodness, if they win the war, oh my goodness, can you imagine if they take over, if they become the majority? Well, they are the majority. The majority of people who live in historic Palestine are Palestinians. So what? So when Palestine is free, the majority of the citizens will be Palestinians. So what? Why is that a problem? If anybody doesn't want to live with Arabs, why did they come to an Arab country to begin with? What were they expecting? And if they don't like it, when Palestine is free, they can go somewhere else. But Palestine is an Arab country, and Israelis are settlers that came from other places. You know, so that's the reality. And I don't know what's wrong with living in a country with a majority of Palestinian Arabs. I mean, I never understood it. I still don't understand it. And again, if somebody doesn't like it, then you shouldn't be living in an Arab country. Palestine has been an Arab country for a very long time.
Thank you. It's your turn, this group.
I thought it was them.
Oh, well, my dad's question doesn't count. Comes back to this group, and it's a bigger group. Okay, green shirt.
Can you speak to how we shift the mindset from a two-state solution to a one-state solution? And what would you say to Arabs or Muslims in the audience, or just in general, who are proponents of the two-state solution? I'd love to hear your perspective.
So the question is, can you expand on why you advocate for a one-state solution? And, what do you think about a two-state solution?
Raise your hand if you strongly believe the two-state solution is a good idea. No, don't, seriously, I'm not. Don't be embarrassed if you do.
Not if we have to debate it with you. Not in this moment.
Because, okay, well, I don't know. What are the virtues of a two-state solution? I'm really puzzled by it. What are the virtues of a two-state solution? That's my first question.
The potential for support from Western superpowers.
I'm sorry?
The potential that the Western superpowers would support
It's easier to achieve.
it.
Really? The two-state solution has been on the table for decades. Is anybody seeing it getting closer? No. My second question is this. Let's assume we talk about two-state solution. And because of the reality that we exist in, the assumption is the boundaries will be kind of the West Bank and these boundaries that the Zionist state created. Who gets the small country part and who gets the big part? How is that determined? Who gets the bigger part? Who gets the 80%? Who gets the 20%? And why is it? But why is it acceptable that the majority of the population, whose country this was to begin with, need to get the 20%, and the immigrant settlers get the larger portion? Why is that? Can somebody explain that logic to me? Today, can anybody seriously say that that makes sense? And the third question is, how is exactly going to happen? How is it going to take place? Is there a scenario that anybody can imagine that the Zionist state that has done everything possible to eradicate the Palestinian people, their culture, their history, their monuments, their cities, took their country and changed its name, took their cities and changed their names, took their streets and changed their names, that country will allow the Palestinians to establish their own independent state on any part of that country, which, according to Zionist ideology, belongs to the Jewish people. Because according to Zionist ideology, the entire country belongs not to the Israelis, to the Jewish people. So you can't even lease or sell it, portions of it, to anybody who's not Jewish, by law. So is there anybody that can really explain to me how, and I've done this. I've done this in an interview. Kim Iverson, I don't know if you guys follow her. She's quite a well-known interviewer. She has her own show and podcast and so on. And I think that was the last time she said that she supports a two-state solution. I said to her, so how's it gonna work and why? And one of the reasons she brought up, and I'm not, I've nothing against her, she's wonderful. I don't want, to create the impression that I'm, criticizing her or anything. But it's something that a lot of people think about. And one of the reasons that she mentioned was what the previous question had to do with, it wouldn't be fair to these white European Israelis for them to suddenly have Arab, Muslim culture imposed on them, and they would have to live like in Saudi Arabia. These were her words. I'm like, what? I don't even know what that means. So I don't know what the virtues are. I can't figure out by what logic the Palestinians should accept anything less than all of their country. And I have no idea, and I don't think anybody has any idea how it's ever going to be implemented. So that's my answer.
How would a one-state solution in your mind be implemented? How would you change the perspective or narrative that's been put forth of the two-state solution for so many years? Because I'm in agreement with you. I believe in the one-state solution. I actually don't care what it's called because
I care. I think it should be called Palestine.
But I'm just saying that for the benefit of everybody. But
No, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why the name counts, and it's a good point that you raised. A lot of people say, "Oh, I don't care what it counts." Well, let's talk about that. So, going back at least 4,000 years, that country has been known as Palestine by the Egyptians, by the Greeks, by the Assyrians, by the Babylonians, by the you look at documentation. That country has been referred to as Palestine consistently, almost 4,000 years. The partition of the country, which was a Zionist, effort, is called the partition of Palestine. The disarmament agreements were like ceasefire agreements in 1949, after which the state of that new Zionist state was recognized and established. Were called the boundaries were. It was described still as Palestine in these agreements, if you read them. Suddenly, everybody forgot that this country is called Palestine and it has to be called Israel. Why? Since May of 1948, everybody forgot that all of those centuries and millennia before that, it was called Palestine. And now they get to determine that. I mean, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. Why? The name matters. It's been Palestine. There's a famous Mahmoud Darwish poem as well. And so it's Palestine. It should be Palestine. Now, the way it becomes, first of all, it is one state. It's one state. It's an apartheid state, but all of Palestine is one state. So what needs to happen, the apartheid state needs to be dismantled and be replaced by a free, democratic Palestine from the river to the sea. That's it. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's simple. We've seen it happen before. The most famous, or probably the most well-known example is South Africa, right? But we've seen racist, fascist, dictatorial regimes fall and be replaced by democracies. I can go on through just in my lifetime. The list goes on and on and on. So it's a one-state apartheid. It needs to be transformed into a one-state democracy with equal rights. That's the progression. I can't think of anything, again, I'm not saying it's easy, but I can't think of anything more simple than that, a more simple explanation than that.
There's no number here. Or remember, go ahead.
I want to say to Annie that our tax preparer gave us $1,000. And he went to his car and wrote a map of Palestine older than 100 years old. He wanted to give it to them. I think we need to auction it here. We start with 250 later on. Whoever gives money to the foundation gets this money. My question to Miko is this. Tonight or this afternoon, you are confusing us. You are telling us if we take the U.S. Constitution and put it in the state of Israel, it will blow into pieces, number one. Number two, the second day after October 7, when Netanyahu looked at the American television, and said, this is our 9/11. Immediately I said, God Almighty, language is powerful. He's going to say to the President of the United States, you know, that's the way they talk, leaders. You destroyed, with 9/11, you destroyed Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and everybody else under the sun. And let me hanky-panky with 29 miles and 10 miles. And I think the president says, God bless, I'll give you money and I'll give you ammunition. That's the action. To me, we need to convince our American people that the Palestine problem is a U.S. problem. And we need, with the leadership of the young people, to turn the table around and start working on this. So I want to say thank you. So tonight, I hope this afternoon before they leave, they will give money for the foundation because we need to give more scholarship. Is that okay? Thank you.
Question.
I saw this gentleman in the blue shirt in the back.
So one way that I've thought about genocide in Gaza is that it's a massive high-tech lynching, white supremacist lynching. And in that connection, I've been very impressed by the National Lynching Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, that Brian Stevens and the Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative created several years ago. The work they've done to keep expanding the memorial there, but they also do work with communities across the country where lynchings occur, including with that. So my question is, do you think, and the question is, do you think there's ever going to be a possibility to build a Gaza memorial, Gaza genocide memorial? Maybe at Rafah, I don't know where it would be. You have to put an iron dome over it so it's really blow it up. But it might, you know, and in this, the report, Anatomy of a Genocide, that Francesca Albanese, this UN Special Rapporteur, issued some months ago, one of the recommendations is there needs to be restitution, and there needs to be acknowledgement, accountability, and there needs to be some kind of a remembrance component put in place so that this will not happen again. And, you know, I realize this is a tiny piece of a much bigger issue we're talking about, but I do think symbolism matters. And, you know, how many Holocaust, and I don't begrudge them, but how many Holocaust Memorial Days are there? And I called, you know, several people in Congress a week before NACA Remembrance Day and said, "Look, are you planning to do anything?" And they said, "What's NACA?" And, you know, I thought, well, that's what happens when there's only one Palestinian American in Congress, and for AIPAC, that's one too many. And we need to do something, again, to, you know, to build the acknowledgement that the genocide did happen, and that it, you know, it's been happening for the past 60 years, and it needs to stop. And one part of that is education. And in my mind, you know, I have a picture, I'm going to shut up, but I have a picture of, you know, something like the lynching memorial in Montgomery with beautiful art, a reflection pool, and then the names of all of the victims, and the names of all of the people who were complicit, and the names of the courageous handful of people, like the people in this room today, who dared to speak up against it at considerable personal cost before it was too late. So that's a long-winded question. Thank you.
Can I say I second him?
Yeah.
And let's build it in DC, in Washington, DC.
We've got the flag.
We
now.
are actually in the process. We're going to open a Palestine Genocide Museum at the Palestine House of Freedom. We're very big. Already talking to, you might know, there's a Palestine Museum in Connecticut. It's a wonderful museum. And the curator, Faisal Saleh, has been down several times, and we're already in conversation with an architect, because we have a whole space there that can be dedicated to that. And we're actually been talking about that already, about opening a Palestine Genocide Museum in Washington, D.C., yeah. And I'm sure that once Palestine is free, there will be plenty of memorials. I'm sure there will be, yeah.
We have time. We're a little bit over time. Let's do 2 questions, and we're going to come back.
Hi, good to see you. I've been following your social videos for a bit. My question is, the Semitism, the anti-Semitism have been like a nuclear bomb, basically. You put people in Scotland on their tracks. So I come from a country where we consider ourselves Semitic because of language. I'm from East Africa, we have the same fate because Ertra was actually given to the Zionist by the Bush initially, but they declined. And therefore, to God for the Palestinians, unfortunately. So, how do you dismantle that scenario? I think the Palestinians have, this is my son, we always say, why aren't they pushing back saying, we are the real Senate? Because they've been using it, now it's like whenever it's a Semite, it's only for Israelis, but nothing about the Palestinians, they're just Arabs. So how do you dismantle that world? How do they take it back? We all need to take it back. Because for me, I tell people that I'm Semite, and so it's not only Israeli stuff. How do the Palestinians take it back?
So I'll repeat the question really quick. Palestinians are Semites. There are many people around the world who are also Semitic, but the term Semitic has been kind of wholly owned by Jewish people, Israelis specifically. But, how do we take it back? How do we, everyone's just, the overwhelming narrative through the propaganda machine has been that it only applies to Jewish people, and it's been weaponized, right? So is there a way for us to take it back, or should we just stop playing with Zionist talking points and talk about something else?
It's a smokescreen. It's a smokescreen. The only people that talk about this are them and then us when we respond to it. It's an absurd, every so often, because the entire Zionist narrative is built on lies, they need to keep creating new and new and new misinformation and lies. And then they create this entire defense system where if you reject their claims, then you are something bad. So the latest one is anti-Semitic. My recommendation is what Stephanie said. I don't engage in this. There's a genocide going on. That's the conversation. It's like Iran. Oh my goodness, Iran. There's a genocide taking place in Palestine. Don't change the subject. Iran is not threatening anyone. The problem is the Zionist regime in Palestine is engaged in a genocide. That's the conversation. And they throw in all these smoke screens trying to change the conversation, and it works. The problem is that the rest of the world, like sheep, just looks where they point and nod their heads instead of saying, don't change the subject. You are a genocidal criminal regime and you've got to go. That's the only thing that matters. Who they say is Semite or not Semite is a conversation that is not going to take us to where we need to go, which is to save the Palestinian people from a genocide. So that's my response to that. I'm not saying it's not an important conversation. I'm saying in the context of what we're facing in Palestine, that wouldn't be my first priority.
All right, question for Aaron. We had two hands in the back. What you got?
Very honored to be here today. I was traveling from Florida to North Carolina, stopped by to meet this gentleman. He said we have to come here, and I'm very happy, actually, to be here. It's been now 11 months. We're close to a year, and every day we are seeing a lot of people like dying, suffering. We did a lot of things. We did the protest, we shout out, we spoke, but it's still going. So we feel hopeless sometimes, like we get to that, like emotionally. So what we can do, we can't do anything. But like I will put my questions in two parts. Like number one, what we have accomplished. So we look at that just to lift us up, kind of. It's not a victory yet, but something that we have changed in the past 11 months. And number two, the second part of the question, what we can do as individuals. Like, let's put it in practical. So what we can do, everybody in his part, in his field, so we can walk out from here and we put that as the last question, if I don't know if you answer another question. And thank you very much, because when I walked in here and I saw a Muslim and Jews and Christian held in a church, and I see also like a white, African American, from everywhere. And this is where we believe that this is a humanitarian case, and this is where we have to begin with. This is where we have to, what do you call it, stand. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a great question, right? We've all witnessed 11 months of just harrowing, live-streamed death and destruction. Is there anything in your mind that you feel like is worth celebrating?
Just something to lift us up.
Something, I mean, listen, I'll say, as an activist, before Miko, give you some time to think about what you want to say, but I've never seen this many people care about Palestine, right? I've been Palestinian my whole life, and nobody has ever cared. It felt like nobody ever cared what we went through, right? And that if just existing as Palestinian is offensive to people, and our mere existence is insulting, and it means that we're bad people, and that we don't like Jewish people, and all of these things. And I feel like the tide is turning. I feel like Palestine has a seat on the world stage right now, and we have this zeitgeist moment to educate so many more people. And amidst all of the horror and death, I feel like that is something that we've gotten out of this. We're at the forefront of the consciousness right now. And so I'm curious is there anything that you see?
Well, it's interesting. I was at a couple of events recently that were kind of had a celebratory, theme to them. There's the Ramallah Convention, which is a big celebratory event where people who are, descendants from Ramallah get together. It's a huge convention. Taibeh before that, it's another Palestinian town, and other events like that. And there were people that were feeling a sense of, should we be celebrating? I mean, because it's usually there's a beautiful dinner and there's performances and it's kind of, celebratory. And people were feeling just uncomfortable with that as we see this horrific, sadistic slaughter of Palestinians take place. And the point that I made, I was invited to speak, and the point that I made was, what is it that these brave fighters from Gaza are fighting for? What is it that they're dying for, if not to see Palestinians celebrate their identity, celebrate their heritage, celebrate young Palestinians marching in with flags and singing the national anthem and so on? So I think it's there are moments of pride even within this horrific tragedy. What these brave Palestinians that came out of Gaza were able to do in terms of politically and militarily is to, in many ways, shut down the apartheid state. paralyze many aspects of it, completely, or almost completely take away the sense, eliminate the sense of security that the settlers had, the Israeli settlers, Zionist settlers have in Palestine. Now they're paying an enormously inhumane price. At the same time, I think there's no way that they didn't anticipate this. Palestine is certainly on the map like it's never been before. So, and one thing that, I'm very proud of is that we opened the Palestine House of Freedom the day before the leader of the apartheid state came to speak in front of Congress. And so we expected a small little reception. We put up a flag and put up the sign. A lot of people came. And a lot of people were moved by, we put up the flag. We had somebody sing the Palestinian national anthem and so on. And there's a place in Washington, D.C. for people to come in. I mean, everybody's welcome to come visit. There's Palestinian art. We're displaying. We're building the museum. We're doing a lot of things. But there's a Palestinian flag on Pennsylvania Avenue, very close to the Capitol. And I think a lot of the enthusiasm and the energy to put all that together is a result of what happened on October the 7th. And of course, I mentioned what's been happening on campuses, the way these courageous students, many of whom are not even Palestinians, just like you said, some are Jewish, some are black, some are this, some are that, but they're all united in this struggle, for a better humanity. Everybody's united in that because Palestine is not a religious issue, and it's not a political issue. It's an issue of values. You either support racism and violence, or you reject it. You either support humanity and human rights and justice, or you don't. It's actually quite a simple equation. So that's where we are today, and even in times of such horror, we can still see moments where we can feel hopeful. At the same time, we have to be very careful because, like I said before, it's not going to end until we end it. Nothing's going to happen on its own. Nothing's going to happen by anybody else. We are it. We have to end it. We have to take it upon ourselves to get up every morning and do everything we possibly can to secure the safety, or to guarantee the safety, or create a reality where the safety and security of Palestinians are guaranteed somehow. Because right now, a Palestinian can be killed anywhere and there are no consequences. In Palestine or on Palestine, as far as Tehran, it doesn't matter. And that's up to us, that's on us. How we do it, I have my idea. That's why I initiated and I'm part of this initiative of the Palestine House of Freedom. Because I know that right now there's nothing I can do to stop a Palestinian child in Gaza from dying and being hungry and homeless. There's nothing I can do. All the relief, all the millions that we sent to relief is stuck in the border in Rafah. Millions of dollars that have been thrown out. People are doing this, obviously with great intentions, but that's not going to solve the problem. We need to end it forever. We need to guarantee a free Palestine from the river to the sea so the Palestinians are free and safe forever. And that's, to me, the most important thing right now. So that's my way of trying to create hope and then doing everything I can to see that hope materialize.
So before we wrap, a lot of people are showing up here today because they care deeply about Palestinians and the genocide. Do you have some tangible things you've shared? We should be supporting students on college campuses. I wholeheartedly agree. They are the tip of the spear in so many ways for us. Is it worth it to write our reps? Is it, what should we be doing every day when we wake up?
Well, I think that we need to come to terms with the fact that we're facing a very steep and slippery, mountain. And it's going to take time, and it's going to take effort, and it's going to take a lot of creativity to do what we're trying to do. Palestine House of Freedom, we realize this. We want to take a country where, in particular in Washington, D.C., where there's 1,000% support for genocide and apartheid, 1,000% support for this horror that we're seeing in Gaza. And that support is being translated to money and bombs. It's not just, talking points. And we want to shift the conversation to dismantling apartheid and allowing a free Palestine to take its place. The gap requires, and this is something that I've written in my office, closing this gap requires circumventing the business as usual politics through creative strategies. We have to figure out these creative strategies. We have to figure out, what do we have? What do they have? They have the money, they've got influence, and they've got a history of doing it. We have the truth, we have international law, and we have the reality on the ground, which is now displayed every single day through social media, that cannot be disputed. They would give anything to have what we have. So we have to figure out, with the advantage that we have with these things, how we shift the conversation and shift the policy. So I think we need to wake up every morning and try to figure out how to do that, and then call me or send me a message and saying, here's how I think we can do this. Because we're going to need everybody's effort. We're going to need everybody's thoughts on this. Nobody has an answer. And the common wisdom is that it cannot be done. It can't be done because all the congressmen are bought and sold, all the politicians are bought and sold, and the Zionists are all powerful. I don't believe that's true. Apartheid fell in South Africa, dictatorships fell in Latin America, and on and on and on and on and on, and they were all supported by this empire. So it can be done. So my best answer to that is, we need to figure out that strategy. We need to work together. Get in touch with me, organize a little group here. Figure out how you educate. Figure out how you educate your neighbors and your family members to a point where you no longer have to have these conversations about one state, two state, but we can have a conversation how to further a free Palestine. And I am, I'm very hopeful and confident that that is possible, or else I wouldn't be here. It's just that we all need each other to get this done. And I know that if we all work together, we can get it done.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I can't imagine anyone is leaving this room without having learned something or being motivated by something, and shifting your perspective on the horror that Palestinians have been facing for 8 decades now. Thank you again to Dr. Khoury and to Miko for bringing us all together, creating this space, and sharing wisdom with this group. I want to share a couple of additional specific ways you can help, because, guys, we're here for the Laurice Khoury Foundation today. This is an important one. You can donate directly to the Laurice Khoury Foundation to continue the life-changing work they are doing with Palestinian students with disabilities. We have a donor who will match $5,000 in donations that are made this weekend. That puts us to $10,000, and that means 4 years of school for a Palestinian college student. So the people in this room can send a student to school for 4 years in Palestine if we get $5,000 in donations, which will be matched. Not to mention this amazing picture of pre-1948 Palestine here that was donated by our friend Patrick. So the highest donation today, we'll take that home as well. The last thing I'll say is please follow the Laurice Khoury Foundation, follow Miko on socials. We all know about shadow banning. You've got to comment, like, high five, everything on social media to not stop the suppression of pro-Palestinian voices. And please read Miko's book. So sadly, UPS did not get them here in time. But Miko has a few of them, so like 5 lucky people today will get a book signed by Miko, but the rest of you, please read his books. They are life-changing. He is a beautiful writer. He's as good of a writer as he is a speaker, so worth reading. Buy a copy for your friends. And thank you all for being here today, and please do not stop talking about Palestine.
One correction, Stephanie. The portrait was made by Sam Nadi.
Oh, sorry, not Patrick. Donated by Sam. Thank you, Sam.
We don't discriminate. People can give us cash or check, or can go online and give the foundation. We need to reach our goal tonight.
That's right. We'll take donations in any form, Reverend Fahed says. All right, thank you, everybody.